Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel launches a fresh wave of strikes against Iran as Donald Trump considers U.S. involvement in the fresh Middle East conflict. Meanwhile, reports out of the region are claiming that Israel is running low on its defense interceptors, with Washington worried about Jerusalem's supply shortages. At least 59 Palestinians were killed and 221 wounded after Israeli tanks opened fire on a crowd gathered for food aid in Gaza, according to medics. Latest report also showed that 30 were killed by Israeli fire, according to reports. Russia does not stand a chance if NATO stays united, says EU Commissioner Kaja Kallas, as reports show Russian missile strikes kill at least 18 people in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Ukraine's parliament passes a law allowing multiple citizenship to address war-driven demographic decline, according to local reports. Thousands march in Phnom Penh backing Prime Minister Hun Manet amid Cambodia-Thailand border dispute after a soldier's death, as Cambodia accuses Thailand of violations which Bangkok denies. Talks are now set for September, according to reports. North Korea will deploy 5,000 military builders and 1,000 deminers to Russia's Kursk region to aid post-Ukraine incursion reconstruction, Russian security chief announced during his visit to Pyongyang today. Kim Jong-un confirmed plans for expanded cooperation, according to local media. At least 32 flights were cancelled after Indonesia's Mount Levotobi Laki-Laki erupted, prompting the highest alert and evacuation of 450 families. Meanwhile, 3 Australian men were arrested for a fatal shooting that killed 2 men in Bali, according to the police chief. UAE blames navigational miscalculation for earlier collision between oil tankers Adalin and Front Eagle near Strait of Hormuz between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman, with no casualties or spill, according to Energy Ministry statement reported by Reuters. Spain rejects U.S. President Donald Trump's push for NATO members to spend 5% of GDP on defense, raising unity concerns, while Greece repatriates dozens from Israel and Beijing evacuates nearly 800 Chinese citizens from Iran, according to media reports. Iran has tightened security controls across major cities as the military confrontation with Israel deepens and as Donald Trump considers U.S. involvement in the conflict. This comes as the Israeli military began a new wave of attacks targeting Tehran. Israel's military said it struck an Iranian centrifuge production facility and multiple weapons manufacturing sites in the latest round of strikes between the two. Meanwhile, 3 unmanned aerial vehicles launched from Iran were intercepted earlier, according to Israeli officials. A surface-to-air missile was also fired at an Israeli drone, though it fell inside Iran without casualties. Moreover, according to reports, Israel is running low on its defense interceptors. A U.S. official has confirmed that Washington is worried about supply shortages, even as the U.S. continues to support Israel with defensive systems. A Washington-based rights group has said that over 580 people have been killed in Iran, including 239 civilians and over 1,300 injured. Israel has also sustained losses, with at least 24 people dead and hundreds injured, following over 400 missiles and drones fired by Iran in retaliation. On the other hand, tensions flared after Iranian officials accused European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas of ignoring Israel's nuclear arsenal while criticizing Iran's nuclear program. Iran's ambassador to Geneva also told the UN Human Rights Council that targeting Iran's nuclear facilities risks hazardous leaks and constitutes war against humanity. Meanwhile, Iran's former economy minister has urged that for 100 days all oil and LNG cargoes should require Iran's permission to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. However, this has not been confirmed by the government yet. This comes as a cruise ship said to be carrying evacuees fleeing Israel arrived in Cyprus after thousands were left stranded by the closure of Israel's airspace. Now we have guests joining us for this discussion. Peter Bohm, he's a foreign editor at Weekly Blitz, joining us live from London. Thank you for joining us today. Could this sixth day of conflict tip over into direct confrontation between the US and Iranian forces, especially in proxy regions like Iraq or Syria?
The United States assists Israel in attacking Iran. That is for sure, because I think what we are now agreed upon, that the Israel and the United States want to see a complete change of regime. If that happens, it may be the case that Iran's proxies in Iraq certainly may start attacking US assets, but it's doubtful whether the Iran's proxies in Syria will have the will or indeed the ability now to assist other Iranian proxies in attacking US assets. So in Iraq, potentially. In Syria, I don't see it. And as we've seen in Lebanon with the Houthis, who have been completely decimated, and Hamas being weakened day by day, those other Iranian proxies will not assist at all. What the Houthis can muster is an unknown quantity. They're totally reliant on Iran, as we know, but it's been quite interesting that in the last 6 days, the Houthis have been, from a military point of view, non-existent. So we don't really know what's going on in Yemen with the Houthis and why they haven't been more active in assisting the Iranians in their defense and attacking of Israel.
Now shifting focus to Trump's comments, if Vice President J.D. Vance or envoy Steve Witkoff were to be sent to Iran, what would that signal about US's willingness to engage diplomatically?
I think they're running a two-tier strategy here. One, they've always got to keep the diplomatic door open, and if it fails, they can always blame the Iranians for its failure. So by continuing on diplomacy, that's what one would expect of any of any nation. However, I do believe that Trump would rather diplomacy failed and that regime change through military force could be achieved. And we're already seeing more and more the exiled Shah of Iran, or his son I should say, featuring more and more on mainstream television channels, on social media all the time. Even a strategy for the first 100 days of his rule should Khamenei and his totalitarian theocracy be defeated. So I think the two-tier strategy, military and diplomatic, are both currently running parallel with one another, with the expectation that the diplomacy will fail and the military strategy will take precedent.
And Israel recently struck an Iranian centrifuge production facility and weapons plants. What is the strategic importance of these sites, and how does targeting them alter the conflict's dynamic?
Clearly, any such attack is further going to weaken the Iranian inability to respond militarily and to pose more of a military threat than they were able to respond. That will put pressure on them diplomatically for sure. So the dynamics will change. Again, going back to what I said on the two-tier strategy of diplomacy and militarily, the continuous attacks by Israel on such sites within Iran will achieve Israel's objective of weakening the Iranian position, both diplomatically and militarily, and may have to bring them to the table. There is one other thing going on, which I'm not sure whether you're going to make reference to, but the latest news I've had from my sources is that yesterday there was quite a major cyber attack on an Iranian bank, one of the biggest banks in the region, and a bank very well known to me because in my previous life I used to do quite a lot of business with them. Bank SIPA of Iran, which is now controlled by the IRGC. There was a huge cyber attack on them which completely put their computer systems and ability to function out the whole of yesterday and indeed carrying on into today. And moreover, there's been another cyber attack on an organization that assists the Iranian regime with their cryptocurrency, a method by which they've been able to fund some of their purchase of weapons and also to fund their proxies within the region. And we're not sure of the exact amount, but from what I'm gathering, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars has been hacked from that crypto site. So there's the military strategy going on, the diplomatic strategy going on, and a third tier, which I should have mentioned earlier, and that's the abilities of the Israelis to hack into the Iranian banks and the economic strategy, I should say.
Building on your answer, is there any chance that these cyber attacks carried by Iranians or Iran will they start targeting U.S. allies as well?
Sorry, let me just be clear on your question. The attacks, the cyber attacks so far have the successful cyber attacks on both the banks and the cryptocurrency accounts have been by Israel on Iran. Now, clearly, Iran do have the technical expertise to counter such cyber attacks with cyber attacks of their own. But their position has been so weakened both by the number of people who are leaving Tehran, technicians, professionals, experts in all these fields. We've seen from satellite pictures of the tens of thousands of people queuing up to get petrol to leave the city. So it's doubtful whether, from a personnel point of view, the Iranians currently have the ability to damage the Israeli economy through cyber attacks, as Israel has damaged their economy through cyber attacks.
Peter, thank you for clarifying me over there. And there are reports that Israel is running low on missile interceptors, and the U.S. has expressed concern about that. How critical is this shortage, and what might be the implications if Israel cannot replenish its defense systems?
Now, this itself would completely change the dynamics and in Iran's favor. The report, I understand, came from as yet an unknown diplomatic source within the US administration, and if true, and if Israel is running short of such equipment, then that puts Israel in a very, very vulnerable position which would mean more and more of the ballistic missiles from Iran will get through to Israel and damage. That would really put pressure on the Israeli government as more damage and more deaths are reported. But I must reiterate, it's so far come from one source that I've not yet been able to verify. Perhaps you may have. I'm double checking and checking on this, but as yet the information has not come through who the source came from. But as I said, if it is true, it would be severely damaging to Israel. The one thing that probably would counter that would be if the Americans themselves started resupplying Israel with the necessary military equipment needed to counter the Iranian ballistic missiles coming through. But yes, to answer your question, the dynamics would be severely changed in Iran's favour and to Israel's disadvantage if that is a true scenario.
And now that humanitarian rights groups report over 580 deaths in Iran, and of which nearly 240 civilians and at least 24 Israeli fatalities as well from Israeli media. So from media's perspective, how are different outlets presenting these civilian versus military casualties?
It's a very, very interesting question. I think Israel has got to the point now where the global mainstream media, I should say, has since October the 7th been so biased against Israel that I think from an Israeli perspective, the continuation of deaths in Iran, whether civilian deaths or otherwise, is not going to have an impact on the Israeli society nor on the Netanyahu government. And I'm pretty sure too that any Israeli deaths will be met with inertia by the United Nations, NGOs, global charities, because Israel is not a popular nation with those who are currently running the world order. And by that I mean the United Nations. I mean, just think about it. There are over 50 Islamic countries within the UN and one Jewish state. The UN is dominated by an anti-Israel agenda. And I think from an Israeli government point of view and from an Israeli society point of view, they've just thrown up their hands in despair and said, okay, we're going to live with this. Iran should have all the media advantages during this conflict. They can say, oh, Israel started the war, we were negotiating with the nuclear arsenal, etc., etc. But I think in reality, the tit-for-tat missile launches from either side are going to continue, and unfortunately civilians on both sides are going, as they always are, collateral damage, and they're going to be the ones that are going to suffer.
Thank you very much, Peter Baum, for joining us and bringing your expertise as a foreign editor to our conversation. Now we move on to our next story. Russian army said that it has captured another village in Ukraine's Sumy region. Meanwhile, EU's Kaja Kallas has said that Russia doesn't stand a chance against NATO. She warned that Russia's defense budget signals long-term aggression. The EU is focusing on raising funds and easing regulations to support its defense industry. In Ukraine's latest aerial assault, Russia unleashed over 400 drones and 30 missiles in a massive overnight attack, killing at least 18 people and injuring more than 150. The capital Kyiv was the worst hit. A missile destroyed part of a 9-story residential building, leaving 16 people dead, while 2 others died in Odessa. President Zelensky called it pure terrorism and declared a day of mourning. Earlier at the G7 summit in Canada, French President Emmanuel Macron slammed Vladimir Putin's complete cynicism, accusing him of exploiting global distractions to intensify attacks on civilians. Now we have Thomas Porteous joining us for this report, and he's an anchor and correspondent at NewsX World. Thomas, what more can you tell us about this current situation between Ukraine, Iran, also G7?
Well, yes, Zoom, we've had many developments both on the diplomatic front and on the battleground in recent days. At the forefront of that diplomatic front is the G7 talks in Banff, Canada, which Zelensky was invited along to. There was hopes of a possible Trump-Zelensky meeting. However, both of leaders have now left, with that meeting ultimately not occurring. Trump did leave early due to these rising tensions in the Middle East that you have raised previously. This obviously follows a phone call between Trump and Putin that happened on the 15th of this month, saying that there will be further talks towards this peace deal on June the 22nd. Direct talks between Ukraine and Russia. Now, in regard to these battlefield developments, the Ukrainian capital is reeling from a huge attack by intensified Russian forces, with reports of a death toll ranging between the number of 15 and 24. Multiple news outlets are reporting different things. However, this is the biggest strike on the Ukrainian capital this very year, and the third biggest strike on the capital of the entire war. Ukraine has responded today and said they have recaptured Anrikiva, which is in the Sumy region of Ukraine, which they've reclaimed back from Russian troops. This comes obviously after Russia has intensified its operations following Ukraine's Operation Spider's Web, where they launched missile and drone strikes deep into Russian territory. That embarrassed Russia and Vladimir Putin, and so Russia have now intensified their military operations in the country of Ukraine. This obviously comes with a backdrop of Vladimir Putin saying that he wants peace. However, all we've seen currently by these direct negotiations between the two delegations, the Russians and the Ukrainians, is a prisoner swap which saw the exchange of 1,200 prisoners from each side earlier this week. But we'll have to wait until the 22nd of this month, if it does occur, on how these new direct peace talks between Russia and Ukraine move forward.
Thank you very much, Thomas Porteous. Now we move on to our next story. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un met Russia's top security official, Sergei Shoigu, in Pyongyang, state media KCNA has reported. Kim and Shoigu are said to have discussed a special military operation in Russia's Kursk region, which borders Ukraine. They also discussed cooperation plans for Moscow's rebuilding of Kursk region. State media reported that plans to commemorate the heroic feats of North Korean soldiers involved in the region were also part of the talks. Shoigu said that North Korea will send 5,000 military construction workers and 1,000 sappers to the region to help rebuild infrastructure following Ukrainian incursions that North Korean troops helped repel. This visit marked the second meeting between Kim and Shoigu in less than 2 weeks. South Korea condemned the move, calling it a violation of UN sanctions and urging an immediate halt to such cooperation. Kim Jong-un has repeatedly expressed unconditional support for Russia's policies amid concerns that Pyongyang may be receiving advanced military technology and economic support in return. In November, Russia and North Korea signed a mutual defense treaty agreeing to support each other in case of any aggression. Now we move on to Middle East. Israeli tank fire killed at least 59 people and wounded over 220 others in the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis, according to Palestinian medics. The incident occurred as a large crowd gathered near aid trucks in hopes of receiving food. Reportedly, Israeli tanks initially allowed the crowd to approach before firing shells into the area. The Israeli military acknowledged firing near an aid distribution truck that got stuck in the area, saying it was reviewing the details in a statement. The IDF said it regretted harm to civilians and claimed it tries to minimize such incidents while ensuring troop safety. Palestinian health officials say this was the deadliest single-day toll since aid deliveries resumed in Gaza last month. In total, at least 73 people were killed across Gaza in a separate strike and clashes. Authorities in Gaza report that 397 people seeking food aid have been killed since late May. Since the war began in October 2023, Gaza's health ministry says nearly 55,000 Palestinians have been killed. Israel's campaign followed Hamas attacks that killed 1,200 people and took around 250 hostages. Now we move on to our next story. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has clarified that the recent ceasefire with Pakistan was achieved through direct military talks, not by U.S. mediation. Modi spoke with the U.S. President Donald Trump during a call at the G7 summit in Canada. Trump had earlier claimed that the U.S. helped mediate the ceasefire after the 4-day conflict in May, but India says the talks happened only between India and Pakistan, and on Pakistan's insistence, the conflict began after an attack in Indian Kashmir, which New Delhi blamed on Pakistan-backed terrorists. India responded with cross-border strikes under Operation Sindoor. During the call, Trump expressed support for India's fight against terrorism. Modi invited Trump to visit India later this year for the Quad summit, an invitation Trump accepted. The two leaders planned to meet at the G7, but Trump left early due to tensions in the Middle East. Now we move on to the Middle East. U.S. forces have withdrawn from 2 additional bases in northeastern Syria, accelerating a troop drawdown that has raised concerns among Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. Reporters say that the Al-Wazir and Tel Baidar bases in Hasaka province were largely deserted, with only small SDF contingents present. SDF commander Mazloum Abdi warned that the reduced U.S. presence may be insufficient to contain the growing threat from members of Islamic State. ISIS activity has reportedly increased across Syria, with attacks targeting SDF forces and a resurgence of the extremist group cells in cities like Damascus. This development comes amid heightened regional tensions following recent Israeli airstrikes on Iran. U.S. defense systems successfully intercepted Iranian-made missiles aimed at the al-Shaddadi base hours after an interview with Abdi. The Pentagon has declined to comment on the withdrawals. Now we move on to Central Asia. China and Central Asian countries have agreed to improve connectivity by land and air, officials said following a summit in Kazakhstan's capital Astana. Leaders from China, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan met to discuss enhancing road and railway links, as well as opening more direct flights to China. The Chinese Foreign Ministry stated that China will work to simplify visa procedures with the 5 Central Asian nations and explore the possibility of opening consular offices in the region. Additionally, China, along with Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, plans to accelerate the modernization of existing port facilities and evaluate the need for new ports to support growing trade. During the summit, Chinese President Xi Jinping signed a treaty aimed at elevating ties with Central Asia, emphasizing deeper cooperation on trade, energy, and infrastructure with this resource-rich region. Now we move on to Africa. In Kenya, a police officer has been arrested for shooting an unarmed civilian during protests in Nairobi on Tuesday. The protests were sparked by the death of blogger Albert Ojwang in police custody. A disturbing video aired by Citizen TV shows 2 officers beating a man before one fired at him as he tried to flee. The victim, identified as a face mask vendor, was seen with a severe head wound. Police spokesperson Muchiri Nyaga confirmed the arrest of the officer involved. Protests have erupted across Kenya demanding justice for Ojwang, who died in police detention on June 8. Public anger intensified after an independent autopsy revealed he had been assaulted, contradicting earlier police claims of suicide. Demonstrations also spread to Mombasa, where police clashed with protesters. Amnesty International condemned the violence, reporting incidents of motorcyclists attacking protesters. Kenya's President William Ruto has called Ojwang's death heartbreaking and unacceptable. Now we move on to South America. A Colombian court has ordered the country's lower house to redo its vote on a major pension reform, citing procedural irregularities. The reform, approved by both chambers last year, aims to expand pension access and reduce state subsidies. However, it will not take effect until the court gives final approval. Lawmakers have 30 session days to revote, and President Gustavo Petro is expected to call for extraordinary sessions. Meanwhile, Colombia's Senate has approved a revised labor reform bill after weeks of political tension. The reform includes stricter labor protections, limits app-based worker exclusivity, and mandates social security contributions from delivery drivers. President Petro has threatened a referendum to bypass legislative delays, but the government now says it may shelve that plan if the final bill aligns with its goals. The next legislative session begins in July. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.